Although our goal is to help inspire others to address their pain through storytelling, the Cloaked Hatters podcast is not a substitute for formal assessment, diagnosis, or treatment. Our content is for informational purposes only and is not considered medical advice. If you need emergency care, please call 911 or the Colorado Crisis Line at 1-844-493-8255 or text TALK to 38255. Call 988 to reach the National Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. Please be safe. You are loved. The Cloaked Hatters is likely not safe for work and will feature content for adult ears which may not be suitable for people under the age of 18. References to sex, sexual violence, crimes, addiction, and personal stories of trauma will be discussed and may be upsetting or scary. Use your best judgment when making the choice to listen, and please, take care of yourself.
So, welcome to episode 2 of the Cloaked Hatters. I'm Sandy. This is
Candy.
Hello. We're happy to be with you today. We have an episode for you today that discusses distress tolerance. So, maybe sit with that for a minute and think about what that means. I'll kind of loosely define it. Distress tolerance, in my mind, means what can we handle that builds us strength, or that we feel we can handle in a way that doesn't, it feels like a speed bump rather than running into a brick wall.
Yes, I love that. I love that. How do we manage our emotions and our feelings when something like that happens? Would be distress tolerance.
Yeah, great. So one of the things that we were thinking about was, where do we learn distress tolerance? And for me as a clinician, I work with that all the time. People often come to therapy to start because they have zero coping skills. They have zero distress tolerance, and they have horrible anxiety. They're having panic attacks, and they just can't manage their big bucket of feelings. Right.
Yep.
So where do we learn distress tolerance? My vote in most of my work and most of my knowledge comes from our family of origin.
Childhood.
Yeah. So we thought we might talk a little bit today about maybe a couple incidents that were personal for us as kiddos, and during our formative years, where we watched the adults around us struggle, and what did we glean from that? What did we learn from that? And how did we have to shift and change in order to come up with distress tolerance skills that maybe we have right now?
Sounds great.
Yeah.
Should I start?
You should.
All right. So first thing that comes to mind, there were several, these are, I'll just do like a blanket kind of thing. Several times where I got hurt as a kid.
You mean like physically hurt?
Physically, yeah. I was awkward and gangly.
Okay.
And and just not watching where I was running, all the things. And a couple of times I fell on my knees repeatedly. And when that would happen, it would bust my leg open and I would need stitches. And I wasn't going to get stitches because we were broke.
No health insurance, I'm guessing.
Right.
Got it.
Right.
Yeah.
This would have been mid-'80s. Yes. Mid-'80s. And my mom's second husband it was like a family-owned thing. So,
got it.
No health insurance.
Yeah.
And we were not allowed to use government help. So, because we didn't have those resources, I got a butterfly bandage and a cardboard.
You're going to say splint.
Yeah, a cardboard box for a splint on my leg. And I was not allowed to complain about it. And so the distress tolerance, like I had to shove everything in. If I cried too much, I was told to stop. You know, don't be a baby. I don't remember exactly what was said, but
don't whine.
I learned about, whining was just off the table. A lot for a generation.
For sure.
That was a thing. And that happened repeatedly for me. Not being allowed to express my emotions. So my distress tolerance skill that I learned was to just shove it deep in there, lock it away in the attic, like you were talking about in episode 1.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I think many of us have had those experiences. I know for me, I watched a lot of both of my parents holding things in, and they'd maintain, and it seemed kind of cool and copacetic, and then one thing would happen, And I didn't grow up in a violent family or a verbally aggressive family, but there were times that I was scared shitless because of the yelling. And I still, to this day, I hate yelling. And it takes a lot of me using my own distress tolerance skills to be able to say, this isn't mine. This isn't something that I have to respond to, but my neurobiosystem still registers it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Actually had the opposite. There was a lot of violence and a lot of abuse in the where I grew up, and it definitely had an impact for me later on life. Like, it just continued to build and build until I just wanted to explode. And there were those explosions because they too, I mean, my stepdad drank, I got to see that.
Right.
My mom just kind of shoved stuff inside. So that's what I learned. Yep. I couldn't drink.
Yeah.
Although there was alcohol provided, but we won't go into that.
Sure. That's a whole other
And that
episode.
was, yes, that was the start of something. But yeah, I mimicked what I saw my mom doing. And that was just take it and don't say anything and just, what did we say? Rub some dirt on it and walk it off. That was the big thing.
Yeah. Yep. I had some very similar experiences with my mom. My maternal grandmother was not an easy person to live with and or satisfy in any way, shape, or form. She was always complaining about something, and it was always lots of fear. She was very, very Catholic, but she certainly didn't act like a God-loving, God-fearing person of how I would have imagined people would behave like, right? And I remember every time she would come over to our house for like a holiday or a dinner, which was not very often, I have terrible memories of my mom. I watched my mom turn into this, and she would get so stressed out, and I'd be on the ground like scrubbing grout with a toothbrush, and we would all be like preparing for these, events, and like my grandmother would literally come over and like rub her finger across the top of the refrigerator to check for dust. And even as an 8-year-old, 6-year-old, 10-year-old kid, I could recognize like this really fucked my mom up, and it made her really anxious. And so that when I turned into a married person and had a domestic partner and was living together, in the very beginning of that, I very much mimicked some of those behaviors. And I caught myself, and I was like, I know where this comes from, because I remember thinking about it. I'm like 8 years old, this little kid looking at my mom going, oh my God, grandma really stresses her out. And I don't know that I could like verbalize or articulate it, but I knew what was happening because I could see it. And so I learned some of that lack of distress tolerance directly from my family of origin.
That's hard.
Yeah.
You mentioned grandmas. I could see where you're talking about like the anxiety, and I could see that in myself also as a result of, and my mom went through a lot of shit. And I tried so hard, even as a kid, I would recognize that doesn't seem like the right way to handle this, or, and I would try to not be like that, but still, I guess, I just realized a big thing for me for distress tolerance was being by myself, going out and riding my bicycle.
Same.
Roller skating, swimming, something physical to help get that. Oh, that's a good segue. For reals. They to help get out the emotional. Like doing something physical.
That's right.
And that's huge. And I've talked to people about that. And boxing.
Yes.
Mixed martial arts.
Yep.
Right.
All the MMA stuff.
Right.
Yeah. People who learn, and that in and of itself to me clinically is sort of like a fight or flight response, right? So you're not only doing a little bit of flight because you're trying to leave the scenario.
Yes.
But then you're like fighting your way through it outside of like you're saying, the energy that gets sort of stuck in our body makes our heart flutter, makes our throat dry, like we're choking on our words, we get hot, we get sweaty. Yeah. And that's the body's signals of saying, hey, something is really not okay right now, and you're not okay, so let's flee the situation and do something that makes us feel okay. And what we're really doing from a neurobiochemical standpoint is we're discharging all that energy.
Yes.
So good for us.
It is. And also, you mentioned in last episode you used to write a lot, poetry and all that, and that was another one too. Is if I didn't feel like going out on my bicycle or whatever, roaming the streets of Boulder when it was safe to do so, I would pull out my paints, or I would like paint my nails, or I would I remember I actually came up with a Star Trek game. I don't remember anything about it.
That's fucking amazing.
But
though.
it was like I had the races down, and I don't remember anything about it, but I was so proud of it. It probably got tossed. I don't have it, but I would sit there and just escape.
Yeah.
And that also ties into, our intro episode is the escapism aspect of it, and just disconnecting and going somewhere else.
Yeah. The escapism, I think, really needs to be something that if we're around traumatized folks, and even people who are just really anxious and don't necessarily have trauma, that anxiety has to go somewhere, right? In order for us to be healthy and well, we cannot run around with this all the time. And like sometimes even I, on certain days when things are rough, I'm like, I know my ears are up here and that's probably not the best place. So I need to do my own sort of distress tolerance throughout the day, depending on resources. Am I rested? Am I hydrated? Did I eat something? How did things go yesterday?
Right.
And so I think really people involving their physicality, I mean, we see this with people who are on the spectrum. Like they get very anxious in social situations, and then we see the flapping, or we see the other stimming type behaviors, and people have been so shamed for doing those things, when what they're really doing is creating their own and using their own very personalized distress tolerance skills to get through a situation that's causing them distress. And it may not cause the other person distress, because we already said in episode 1, not everybody has the same distress tolerance.
Right. That just reminded me. So I used to count.
Yes.
I would count my steps. I would count windows on the side of a building, or I would do math.
Yep.
3, 6, 9, 12, 15,
Yes.
just things to do with patterns, shapes, or numbers. And I was fucking weird as a kid. Okay, I'm still fucking weird, but I embrace that shit now.
Yeah.
I'm happy to have that weirdness. But when I was a kid, I was made fun of so hard about everything that I did.
Right.
And so I learned how to mimic the behaviors of other people, and my self-soothing mechanisms fell to the wayside. Yeah. And because when I get anxiety, I start
fidgeting.
I will do this.
Oh yeah.
And sometimes I don't even recognize I have anxiety until I see that I'm doing something physical.
Yes.
And it goes back to that disconnect between, it's that dissociation between what we're feeling and how we're responding to it.
Yeah.
Oh, I find this is such a fascinating subject, because when I discovered what I was doing and how it's like my skin, we were talking about this earlier today. I like to keep my skin soft because when I'm feeling anxiety, I will pet the shit out of myself.
It's always good to pet yourself.
And I'll trace my tattoos sometimes, or when I have my mohawk, I'll start doing this repeatedly.
yeah. You'll see me do this a lot,
Yes.
And, just kind of, shaking it off.
God, but kids are so fucking mean, and we get made fun of, and it was like such a huge breakthrough when I realized, wait, I have built-in self-soothing mechanisms. I just forgot about them. Yeah. Until therapy.
Yeah.
When we started learning about distress tolerance skills. Because before then, as an adult, for me, it was smoking and drinking.
Yes. And I think any of us with any kind of childhood trauma, especially and we'll get into this in another episode, but I'll just touch on it lightly. I'm a sexual assault survivor, and it went on for multiple years, and it was all throughout my developmental tween to teenage years, and I was groomed over a large number of years. And that's not something that I tell everybody, but it's something that has to be talked about, because I get so pissed off when I just as a little tiny segue, and we'll pull right back, when I see the word grooming. And we see it easily associated with people who are doing drag or adult entertainment or LGBTQ people in general. I just want to spit and hiss and suck the life out of the person saying it, because unless you have been there and somebody has done that to you, you don't have an idea of what you're talking about. You're saying things, you're using a word that you don't really know what it actually means.
Right.
So I think when those things happen, when we sort of get that childhood trauma lens, like, we are going to have to come up with weird things that may seem really off-putting to other people to try to cope.
Yes. Off-putting to other people.
Yeah.
And I would say that goes directly into having the need to fit in. You know, we have things going on at home, because also sexual abuse survivor, you know, from the formative freaking years, the sweet spot right there, and it really screws you up.
Yes.
And so as a result of that, there was this feeling alone. I'm like, there's nobody out there like me. Like, I'm going through this. I feel like a pariah. Not that I knew what the word at the time was, but that's what I felt like. You feel so alone. And so you want to connect with other people, and you learn how to drop the behaviors that are socially unacceptable and start bringing in those other habits, behaviors that other people have that seem to be okay with the general population.
It's really akin to masking.
Yes.
It's a masking behavior.
Well, it is,
You know? It's trying to fit in and trying to alter yourself and the way you show up in the world to please other people so they don't think you're fucking weird.
Right.
And because if you, and then the really upsetting thing I think about this, Candy, is that, like, we have all these little stories that we needed to be telling across the span, and we needed to tell someone, but we didn't know what was happening to us. So we didn't know so much that it was so wrong, because if you don't know anything else, what do you have to compare it to?
Exactly.
Right? And you don't get that bird's eye view into other people's lives to know this isn't right. This shouldn't be happening.
Right.
And so it gets normalized for you. And then if somebody's abusing you, they also normalize abusing you. And then you learn that this is not okay, but I don't know how to say that it's not okay.
Right.
Like, you've no fucking clue.
We lose our voice.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, is losing bodily autonomy, whatever that means, whether it's by mental, physical, verbal, all the abuses.
Yeah. All the things.
Especially as a young child, you don't know how, like what you were just saying, you lose the ability to speak out against it. Right. Or I should talk about my personal experience. Like, I felt like I could not say no. Yeah. I didn't feel like I could talk to anybody about it. Yeah. That just was not a thing. And for years in therapy, I'm like, why didn't I say something? Why I couldn't understand. I didn't understand at the time that that's what happens. Yeah. You know,
that's how it works.
You lose your voice. You're in this relationship, whatever type of relationship that is, with a person of trust, and you're like, well, they're supposed to be the good guy, right? But this doesn't feel right. Yeah. And you're just kind of, that John Travolta meme where he's just like, kind of like, that's kind of like how it is in the brain. And it's like, okay. And because going back to rub some dirt on it and walk it off, we're just like, okay, I guess I just walk this off and go for a fucking bike ride.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and then you get into therapy, decades later, and your therapist hears you and they're like,
you're fucked up.
No. I mean, I've been that therapist, and I've also been that client. Right. I can't tell how many times I've seen people respond to, me sharing a little bit of my story, and I can already tell, like, they blank over and they're like, how did that happen? Why didn't anybody see what was happening?
Yes.
Oh my God.
Because things like that were ignored so much. It
was taboo. You couldn't talk about it.
No.
Because number one, nobody gave us the language to talk about it.
Correct.
And just a little tangent here, and then we'll pull right back. Like the sex education system.
Oh, right.
If we don't tell people about their body parts, they won't know that if their body parts are being misused, they won't know what to say. They won't know how to articulate what's happening to their body.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't have those overt conversations with your children, you probably need to figure out how to have those conversations, because they're vitally important to safety.
They're uncomfortable and awkward conversations.
Of course they are.
But the resulting damage of not being able to speak out about what's going on with you is much more uncomfortable.
For sure. One more thing about that before we move on, because I don't know exactly what you have planned, but I did want to share a little bit back to my grandmother. She was this very fastidious, like every time you went to her house, her signature smell was bleach. Everything reeked of bleach, and it was Comet with bleach. It was straight bleach. It was just it permeated your nose, like you could feel the hairs in your nose burning. And she had some very strange things that she did with me where there was clearly shame involved. And because I was a kid, I did not recognize the signs. But looking back as an adult, I was like, something happened to her. Somebody fucked her up. Sure enough, we went back for a visit after we'd moved from Illinois to Colorado. Probably we'd been here maybe 6 years, 7 years, maybe 10. And we were walking around the lake, my mom and my grandma and I, 3 generations. And my grandma is just talking, and she turns around and she goes, well, you know, I was sexually abused.
Just flippant.
And just dropped it and then moved the fuck on and talked about like geese in the park or whatever else we were seeing. And my mom and I just looked at each other like, what the fuck just happened?
Right.
And I was in my head going, oh my God, all the neurotic behavior that she displayed, the need for cleanliness, the shame about body, you can't be seen naked. Like, she would take me to resale shops, I think they were called at the time. They're now thrifting, which we love thrifting. But she would take me to resale shops, and she wouldn't let me sit on the toilet.
Oh.
She made a basket and held me, and I had to put my hands around her neck, and she would put her hands underneath my knees, and I would have to pee over the toilet because I was too little to do a camping hover, which is normally you know how adults do such things. I was an adult; I couldn't reach the damn toilet. You know?
Yeah.
But she wouldn't go out to eat because she wouldn't use other people's silverware or dishes, saying they were dirty and filthy. She was scared of everything. She was a shutaway. She locked herself in her house, and I was like, she had untreated sexual assault trauma.
Right. Which can result in over-controlling behavior.
Yeah.
It's like, I can't control what's going on with me at home. Like, I've had to, I still fight my over-controlling tendencies.
Sure.
And
don't we all occasionally?
Oh my gosh. I'll catch myself be like, whoa, back it up. We don't do this anymore.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's so many things. So we learn how to control every little thing that we can around us. Whether it's the cleanliness or what we consume or what we consume when somebody's not watching. Yeah. Which can turn into unhealthy eating behaviors.
Yeah, sure.
Which could be another episode.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think you had talked a little bit about as we try to bring in that pop culture lens, and we'll do that in fits and starts, and sometimes it'll be straight psych, and sometimes it'll be lore and myth, and sometimes it'll be film, and sometimes it'll be books, and sometimes it'll be a whole smitten matter, because that's just how we roll. But we did have a little bit of a plan to try to tie in some pop culture, so we each had some references that we'd like to share about that. So do you want to go?
Sure.
Okay.
So I kind of mentioned this in episode 1. When we were talking about shoving down, and we touched on it already, shoving down the emotions, like just locking it away in a room. And then what do we do when stuff starts to leach out from under the door and it hits the boiling point? Well, when I was a kid, one of my favorite shows was The Incredible Hulk. I loved that show because I had anger issues, because I didn't know. That's what I saw. Yeah. I didn't want to use a name. I almost used a name. I saw my stepdad. He would get mad and he would beat the shit out of my mom, or he would punch the wall, or name something, you know? And that's what I knew. And I'm like, okay, so when I'm feeling, what am I going to do? I'm going to turn into the fucking Incredible Hulk.
Yeah.
And so, like, Bruce Banner, he's like this lonely guy. He's this sweet guy. I'm like, oh, that's kind of like me, you know? And then he gets mad. And I'm like, oh, that's like me too.
Yes.
And so I felt like I could identify with something. And I know I'm not the only one. So many people identify with that.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, I'm not a freak.
Yeah. No. Yeah.
It's funny. Like,
What
the
a
big
relief.
green guy.
I know.
I'm like, oh, he's not a freak.
I know.
You know?
Yeah.
Oh,
He's
it gives
not.
me chills talking about it.
Yeah.
It hits me in my feels.
Well, and I think I'm trying to think back of like how that show was marketed, and you know, they wouldn't like him when he was angry.
Right.
Don't make him angry. You won't like me when I'm angry. Ooh. So that if we go back to like that accepting of all the parts. Well, you're not acceptable if you're the Hulk.
Right.
Ew.
Oh, being othered.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, man. That's a whole other, like, level to that.
Yeah.
We could just dissect the Hulk in a whole episode.
Oh, we could absolutely run through a diagnosis and a
Oh,
treatment
my
plan and
gosh.
interventions and like I think that we should spend some
That would
time
be
going
so
forward.
fun.
Yeah, and it's definitely a lot of fun. I had an offer to do a podcast about that too, and I've thought about it so many times, like diagnosing the horror villain. I have it written down on several sticky notes because I've lost several of the sticky notes, and I keep writing it down, and I keep not doing it, but I do that in my head, and I think
Right.
you and I have talked about this too. We
Yeah.
watch movies and we're like, what's going on with this person? Like, what happened?
Right. Yes. Like, clearly this person experienced this type of trauma, which resulted in this behavior, which turned into this behavior as an adult.
Right.
And yeah, it's fascinating. I can't not do it
I know.
now.
I can't not
like
either.
understanding how trauma works.
That's
and
right.
my own experiences. I get it.
Yeah.
And now it's like a lens that you can't take off
Yeah.
the camera.
Yeah.
It's like, well, all right.
I mean, that for me is like I've always identified with the villains, because most of the time when villains are assigned their villainry in pop culture or in a novel, say like Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, well, the monster is not the monster.
No.
He is the victim.
Yep.
And Dr. Frankenstein is
It's one of my top 5 favorite
I know,
books.
it's such a great book. And the first time I read it, I was like, oh, I was taking a Gothic fiction class, which was fucking great. I mean, I've been at this incorporating horror and stuff like this for a very long time. And I've always been able to weasel it into papers scholastically and through education. And my teachers were always like, this is really weird, but this is also really good. And I was like, I'm doing something here. But that idea of the monster, it's not Frankenstein's monster. The monster is not the monster. The monster was created and by this man who is not a great guy.
Victor was the monster.
Yeah, he was very much the monster. And so I think when we see in like pop culture the villains, you know, I think that the people who have internal damage or some sort of trauma often look to the monsters as maybe being aligned with them.
Right, exactly. Which brings us to what you're going to talk about.
Yeah. So as we mentioned in the first episode, we clearly have a thing for Stephen King. And his early work is great. And his later work is great too. I unfortunately have not been able to read a ton because of what I do, and I'm always busy reading clinical stuff. But the movie Carrie and the novel Carrie, I had the original novel once, and it was so amazing. And now they have the reprint, which sort of has the eyes, which I'm not a big fan of, and I don't have it anymore. I don't think it's on my bookshelf. I know. It's the original copy, original print. But in that, I remember reading about, and then of course the subsequent film, seeing Carrie. She shows up at school and she gets her period. Perfectly normal thing to happen to a teenager. It happens all the time. It's a very natural, normal thing. And she has no idea what's happening to her. She thinks she's bleeding to death. She is terrified, and she's in the corner, and they're throwing tampons at her and napkins, and they're taunting her. And she is just, you can see the terror in her eyes. And Sissy Spacek just did a fucking phenomenal job.
Yes, she did.
Of working with that character and bringing that innocence and yet that rage at the same time of not being taught anything so that she can get along in the society that she occupies. High school, around other high schoolers, around teenagers with normal body development and neurodevelopment stuff happening. And so then she goes home, and her mom is this high religiosity, really frenetic, crazy character, which Piper Laurie, rest in peace, lady, she did a great job at that character too.
Mhm.
And all that religious trauma didn't allow her to develop normally. So then she encounters a really normal thing at school, and it happens, and she has no idea what's going on, and it terrifies her. So it's totally unequipped to deal with the real world because she was so overprotected and repressed and oppressed, quite frankly.
Yes. That's such a great example.
I know.
And it makes me, I'm going through the catalog in my brain of all these different books that I've read in the past, not even getting into movies. And there's so many examples of this in literature.
Yes.
And in movies, all the things of how people learn to cope and deal with their emotions.
Right.
Oh,
I know.
Yeah.
It's just sort of one of those endless topics, right? So, I don't know. Where do we go from there?
I mean, there's so many. It made me think about, while you were talking with Carrie, or talking about Carrie, I'm like, it made me think of one of my favorite stories, which is called The Hollow Man. And I'm like, why do I like The Hollow Man so much? Have you read that?
I haven't read it, but I have seen the movie.
No.
Not the same.
No.
I figured.
Nope.
It was a shot. It was a shot. I didn't like the movie, but I just remember it.
Awful. I didn't like it.
Duly noted.
Like, not the movie. So I don't want to do spoilers, but it's a story about huge loss. Like huge loss. And what this guy does, it gets me so emotional thinking about it, because I felt like I could identify with so many different parts of this book. When I read it, I think I was 16 or 17.
Who wrote it?
Dan Simmons. He is one of my favorite. You want to talk about a master of horror?
Okay.
I'm listening to Summer of Night right now. It's amazing. He is phenomenal.
Duly noted.
Phenomenal writer. And I think about, the Jeremy Brayman is the main character, and what he goes through, the situations he puts himself in. I'm not going to cry during a podcast, but that is what
I have a tissue.
That's what drew me to the book, is seeing somebody put in this awful friggin' situation and then making bad decision after another and he still manages to get through okay and sort of learn from the stuff, and it's just like stacked trauma.
Okay.
And then he grows out of all of that. And that's all I'm going to say about it, because I don't want to accidentally spoil it, but
sure.
But when you were talking about Carrie, that's what it made me think about, is I am a huge fan of the story of, I guess it would be the hero's journey.
Yeah, absolutely.
You've got this person, let's stick them in the shit and put more on top. And when they get almost to the top, we're going to shove them back down in the hole and let's see you get out of this. And they make it out.
Yeah.
As a completely different, changed person. And, I identify so heavily with that.
So is that story largely about having to come up with new distress tolerance skills because the old ones don't work? Because you're prevented from having them work anymore.
Yeah. It's the growth of, instead of ignoring those and shoving them down inside, taking a look at, examining the life and asking the self, what is happening around me? Why is this happening? What can I change? How can I change my life and create the life that I want?
You know what that makes me think of is Marvel Doctor Strange. Talk about fallen hero, right?
Yeah.
So he's a surgeon,
right?
And his tools are his hands, and he gets into a car wreck because he's driving his very fast, fancy car to go to isn't he going to some sort of gala or something?
I think
like that?
So.
He's going to some dinner or some sort of fancy thing, and he's driving his very fancy car, and he's driving very fast and driving too fast for conditions, which sometimes, if you got a nice car and you got a lot of money, sometimes you just, you're gonna, and you're a surgeon in your super stressful job, you're gonna maybe take it out on the road. Not that I've ever done that. But he gets into an accident, and then it shatters his hands, and he fights it. And he says, no, this can't be possible. And he will not accept what happened when he wakes up and everything is pinned together and he's hanging there in the hospital bed. And he knows that, I think internally you can watch that on his face when he acts through that of he understands how he knew his life is fucking over.
Yep.
It is over, and he's going to have to come up with something else. And being a surgeon and any kind of medical, MD or higher specialist, you spend your life schooling to do that.
Right.
And you are not prepared often if something drastic happens to do something else. I mean, that's a really hard transition to make. And so he fights it. He doesn't accept it. He gets all scraggled. And you see the breakdown of his character where he's not taking care of himself, and he's sitting at home and feeling sorry for himself. And his ex comes in and she's like, look, you're not taking care of yourself. I'm really concerned. And it's been a long time since I've seen the movie, but it's one of my favorite characters depicted on film because he is so damaged. And then he turns out he saves the fucking universe. With his magic. And he is such an asshole when he's trying to learn the skills. He's at the temple, and the monks are like, fucking A, man. You're just trying too hard, and you're not you're not letting it just flow with it, right?
Yes.
He kept fighting it, and finally when he gets his powers, he's like, oh, I am capable of doing different things. But he had to learn a whole new bucket of distress tolerance skills in order to get to that place.
And when you were talking, it made me think about, so in recovery, I'm in a 12-step program, and we talk about ego a lot. And you got to let go of the ego to make room for new skills, let's just say the new to come in to help reshape who you are, how you think, what you do. And that was when you're talking about Dr. Strange. I'm like, yeah, he was an arrogant prick, and he finally mostly let go of his ego.
Sure, mostly.
I mean, Dr. Strange, I think, has to retain a lot of that ego in order to be who he is. But he let go of enough to make room for the healing and magic. I'm waiting for my magic. I mean, I think I already
you have a lot of magic already. We both are magical beasts, but in very different ways.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, that's how it goes for people. When we encounter adverse situations, unfortunately, it sometimes takes a lot of adversity to grow a lot of tolerance.
Yeah. And
come out on the other side, maybe perhaps a better sort of different you.
Right.
Yeah.
A more effective, when I started letting go of punching doors, punching walls, when I get up to here, it turned into anxiety.
Yes.
And I didn't recognize, I didn't even freaking know what anxiety was when I was in my 20s.
Yeah.
I'm like, I guess I'm just a bitch, And
this is just how I am from episode 1.
One of these days, I have to tell about the chicken soup incident with my youngest child, because that...
Oh, dear.
I get shame that comes up. We have talked about it, and worked through it, and I still will apologize. I'm like, I'm so sorry for that trauma that I bequeathed to you.
Yes.
Because of this. But as where was I going with that? Chicken soup. I got distracted by the chicken soup incident.
When you changed from using violence.
Oh, right.
To different skills.
It was control. I needed clean. I needed stuff to be clean around me because I could control that.
Right.
And so my poor fucking kids were not allowed to messes. I still struggle with that. Do you see me getting kind of weird?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm food mess, pet hair stuff. I'm all, and I'm like, you're okay. That's what lint rollers are for.
That's
it's
right.
all right.
That's right. That's right.
You know? And so I worked through that and learned how to talk to myself and to remind me, like, it's okay.
Yeah.
Like, it's okay.
Yeah.
And, you know, we talked a little bit before the episode about DBT therapy. That is one of the therapies that made the biggest difference in my life.
Yeah.
Talk about distress tolerance skills.
Yep.
They're so, oh my God, the pool of tools
Yes.
in that study of psychology. Psychology, is that how you would say it? Of psychotherapy?
It's psychological interventions.
Is huge.
Yeah.
And some of the things, I'm like, oh, I already do that. Is that what I'm doing?
That's what you're doing.
You know? But having shining the light on that and realizing that's what it is opened the door wider for me to accept more skills to add to my little toolbox of things that I can use. And so depending on the situation, I used to have a friggin' checklist. I'm like, if I'm sad, I need this, 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 and this. If I'm feeling angry, this, and this works. If I'm feeling anxiety, this, and that. And I had it on the fridge for the longest time because it was a new habit that I needed to develop.
Yeah, you had that. All that new learning is something that obviously therapy is great for, right? But people often come into it with this very real resistance to, well, why should I have to treat myself with kid gloves? You know, this sort of rolls into that, like, rub some,
walk it off.
You know, walk it off. Don't cry. And I think what's interesting, and I see this all the time in therapy, is that when you acknowledge someone's trauma and you bring it up and you give them the validation and the support and the space and sometimes just the abject silence to let them sit with it, and you're sitting on the other side of the screen offering that space, and that there's something very sacred about that, being with that person and just being like, yes, this awful shit happened, and I'm so sorry, and it wasn't okay, and somebody should have stood up for you. And you can just watch the melting, right? And once we just acknowledge stuff for people sometimes, and it doesn't even have to be a therapist, it can be a friend, it can be a family member, it can be a partner, it can be, you know, a cousin, it can be your cat. You know what, it's that getting that story up and out and having somebody show you the empathy that was not shown to you, so that you can learn to sit in the distress and in the discomfort.
It's like a pressure release valve.
Yeah.
Being able to share.
It's what I call the magic button. Let's push the magic button.
I like that. Ooh, magic button.
And sometimes it takes people a long time to get to the place where they're ready to push the magic button.
Yes.
It's work.
It is a lot of work.
It's not easy.
Man, I have spent so much of my life, like, I recognize that there were things going on and I wasn't handling things properly because I'd find myself in this rut over and over again. And I'm like, but I don't know what I don't know.
Right.
I'm like, I don't know what to change, you know? And therapy did help with some of that.
Yeah.
There's a whole thing behind my first therapist. Ugh. Anyway.
I've heard that story a million times.
But I derailed myself. Yeah, I don't know where I was going with that.
That's all right.
But I lost it completely.
That's okay. It's going to happen here.
Oh, yeah.
It's that, I think, the building of the skills and simply not knowing what to do.
Yes, the not knowing, you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah, yeah. And so oftentimes when I give people interventions, right, they're expecting like, oh, we're going to do these big shifts and changes. I'm like, no, we're just going to kind of start to tally what happened to you this week. When did you find yourself getting really pissed off? When did you find yourself feeling really sad or morose or tearful or angry or upset? And you just felt this slurry of shit in you. How did you respond? And what was it making you think about? So it's like the journaling. It's just a huge piece because it helps the self interface in a very concrete way with the internal self who may not have its voice yet. And you can start to pick around in those things, but you can really tell a lot about people by the way they handle distress. And we talked about the soup throwing in episode 1. And people who are generally doing well across the board don't need to resort to behavior like that because they don't take it all that seriously. They let it roll off, you know?
Yep.
Again, speed bump versus brick wall.
Right. And that's, yeah, talking about the differences between like what is a huge deal to somebody versus what is nothing.
Yeah.
You know, and that I still struggle with that.
We all do.
You know, my brain automatically wants to go back to that. Just walk it off. Like, you know, I had trouble with my oldest kiddo. She has a lot of issues that she deals with. And before I was even healed, I was still medicating with weed and relationships and sex. Anything other than actually dealing with what was going on.
Yeah.
It was, I had that whole attitude. I'm like, well, I went through this and I am fine. Oh my God. Okay. Yeah, I know.
I'm fine.
I know, right? It's like, well, you'll be okay. Like, and I, that trickled down generationally. Ooh, that is a difficult word.
Sure does.
And,
it's a difficult thing to tolerate.
And my poor kiddos had to deal with that with me. And I think about my past behaviors, and it's very embarrassing. Like, I'm ashamed of a lot of how I handled, like, headaches. Like, oh, it's fine, just take some pills. And, well, you know, my oldest struggled to swallow pills when she...
Oh, yeah.
I did too when I was a kid. But, again, I don't want to use a name. My stepdad just made me, he's like, just fucking swallow the pill, you know? Yeah. And I didn't want to make him mad.
Yeah.
So I just learned how to fucking take pill. I can take a handful of pills.
Yeah.
You know? Is that something I should be proud of because of how I learned how to do it? Right? And so just like a couple little Advil, I'm like, it's fine. Like, I could swallow a handful. Why can't you?
Yeah.
And it's so easy because of, you know, our past and how we were raised to get back into that mode. And then I feel like an asshole for even thinking it. You know, I have to redirect that because those ruts run deep.
Yes.
In those neural pathways. And it's like, no, we're on this paved section over here and you got to pull the car back onto the freaking road instead of, Yeah.
That falls in line with me with something I often talk about as a clinician is, why can't you just? And then we fill in the blank. And everybody's heard that. Why can't you just get along? Why can't you just accept your brother even though he's beating on you? Why can't you just tolerate it and go to your room? Why can't you just leave the scenario? Why didn't you just leave him? Because I didn't know what I didn't know.
Right.
And I didn't know how to get to the why don't you just. So it's really easy. And, you know, we're all going to be guilty of it. Well, why did that person not do what... Well, because they didn't know, or they couldn't get to that place because they were in survival mode.
Right. Yep.
So why can't you just sort of aligns with the, you know, just rub some dirt on it. It'll be fine.
It's a lack of acknowledgement of what the other person is able to handle.
That's right. That's right.
And it all freaking ends up connecting in some way.
Yeah, for like, sure.
It's like the squiggly drawing on the thing. It's all just one line, though. You know. Yeah. That's a good one.
Yeah. Why can't you just? I mean, if you really sit and think about it, and this is for you, audience, have you been told that? I'm sure you have. Or have you ever felt that way? Because and as I'm looking around in 2024 and looking at the last, 8 or 10 years of life, like I want to say it to some people. Why can't you just? And then be nice. Why can't you just calm the fuck down? Why can't you just take a chill pill and sit back and relax and really think about why this thing is agitating you so much? Because, I mean, as I said in episode 1, I worked in the prison system and those guys were doing horrible things. But guess what? 98% of them had severe trauma.
Right, of their own.
And that's why they were doing what they were doing.
Exactly.
And once we gave them a space and said, you are a human, you are not your behavior. What happened to you is not your fault, but you recreating the trauma and doing it to other people is not only harming yourself, but now you're hurting other people and you're in trouble for it. So what do you want to do about it now that you have this opportunity?
Oh, I love that. Yes.
Yeah.
That's one of the things I love about you is like willing to look at these people that have harmed others and understand where they came from and offer tools to help them change what they want to change.
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, yeah. Best job of my life, but almost killed me. So, yeah.
I can't even imagine. I can't imagine.
Taught me so much, though. I'm so glad I did it. I'd love to go back to it, but yeah.
Yeah.
Why can't you just? Well, because I'm tired.
Right.
That's
why. There's so many. I mean, yeah, it's not the right question to ask.
Yeah. Yeah. Not right now.
It's the who hurt you is the question to ask.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. For sure. Well, do we have anything else you want to add in here today about distress tolerance?
Oh, man. I mean, there's so much. We covered a lot.
Yeah. We'll probably have to come back to this. Like,
sure.
I don't think it's going to not happen that we're not going to come back to it because it's just part of it, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
It's just the trunk of the tree.
Yes.
And there are so many branches.
So many branches.
And then there are leaves on all those branches. And then you have the little blossoms too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. There's a ton to talk about.
Yeah.
I think we did a good job of covering.
Yeah.
The general topic.
Yeah. I'm kind of thinking that, like at some point down the line, if we get the website sort of moving with resources and things like that, maybe we could put some distress tolerance handouts out there or point people to websites that have those kinds of things and give some of our other, clinician friends or creator friends who are making such information and resources handy to people. Because, I mean, in my opinion, every person on the planet should have some DBT skills.
I wholeheartedly agree.
It's interpersonal communication.
Yep.
It's distress tolerance. It's communication effectiveness. Like, how do we not use those skills in everyday human life every single day, no matter who you are? I mean, if we were to teach kindergartners DBT,
yes, I've said this so many
times. With the
like,
meditation component,
yes,
they know how to handle their shit.
Exactly.
These little people can be taught, but we don't give them enough credit, and we don't have the time and the resources. So, keep those things in mind as we're talking and suggesting things. We're not here to do therapy. That much is clear. But we do have some good ideas because we're dealing with our own shit.
Yes, indeed. And I love the sharing links and because I just want to help people. That's why we're here.
Yeah, I know.
I want to I want to lay myself bare and share my shit to help other people. And show them, hey, this, and this worked for me.
Right.
And we can do that.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, I think we're going to close up shop here. So thank you for joining us today on the Cloak Tatters for our episode on distress tolerance. We're like we said, we're weaving in the lore and the mythology and some of the psych stuff.
Yes.
But we keep finding more things to talk about. So we're going to be here for some time. So maybe you'll join us.
And if you think of anything... feedback or ideas, please hit us up on the website or on any of the social medias. And
we've got
we'll do our best to.
We've got good contact links. You can send us an email. You can drop us a line. You can send us little attachments. Don't send us any porn. We're not into that.
Yeah, no thanks.
Wrong place, wrong audience. But trust me, it's happened as a clinician. God,
oh boy.
That's a whole other. That's a podcast 10 years down the line when I'm retired. I don't know about that. So anyway, we're so glad you could join us today.
Thank you.
And we will see you another time.
Bye.
Bye.